I just want to welcome all of you to our conversation about paying for your parents' care. And before we get started, I just want to mention a couple of things. We are recording this, and we will be sending the recording to you specifically, and we will be putting resources and links in the chat as we go, and encourage you and invite you to do the same. You will all, in case you haven't figured it out, you are all muted. Again, we're using the chat to communicate and welcome all of you to share your perspectives and insights, information, questions throughout. One more quick logistical thing. The best way to watch this discussion is by using the speaker view on your Zoom thing. In the view, upper right-hand corner view, if you click on speaker view, that'll be the best way to watch this. That way you don't see a whole bunch of boxes with people's names in them. Okay, so I just want to say a huge thank you to Larisa and Kim. You guys, we are so lucky to have them. I mean, seriously, I can't think of two better people to help us tackle this topic today, which is, I have to confess, just a little bit nervous because it is such a complicated and tough topic, but I feel like I've got the best possible partners in crime here. So Larisa is an attorney at Elder Law Solutions in Louisville, Kentucky, which is a very special firm in that it provides something called life care planning, which is a much more holistic service for families. It kind of addresses a wide variety of their needs, including legal care management, things like that. So I love life care planning as a concept, and Larisa is an attorney there. So Kim is a CEO of a really cool company called Elder Care Solutions. And literally, I think she must be crazy because she started a company specifically to help families tackling like two really tough challenges. So she likes hard things. She likes problem solving, I guess, finding money to pay for care and finding the best living arrangement for your loved one in that care continuum. So bless both of them, as we say in the South. In case you're not familiar with Daughterhood and you're new to the community, this is your first time sort of tuning in, let me just say we are a community that supports each other around the experience of caring for a loved one. So there are links to our blog, other resources over on our website, which is daughterhood.org. And I want to take a moment and specially recognize what I think is one of our just absolutely capstone programs, which is our podcast, which is hosted by the amazing Roseanne Corcoran. She's phenomenal. She has incredible guests. This is really just a project of love for her, and I encourage everyone to sign up, to subscribe, and to listen to that. And so, and then maybe just the last thing I'll say about Daughterhood before we dive into this conversation is that we have this program called Daughterhood Circles, and Daughterhood Circles essentially connect you all, the community of people who are caring for loved ones, to each other, so that you can share resources, information, feel a little bit less alone and like you're losing your mind. And so if you're interested in learning more about our circles, including how to sign up for one or be a leader, you can learn more about them also on our website. There's a circles tab. Larisa and Kim are also Daughterhood Circle leaders. So that gives you an idea of the caliber of people we have leading our circles. One more quick thing about that, circles are local. We tend to organize them around certain geographies. So for example, Larisa's in Louisville, Kentucky. Everything's virtual now. If you don't see a circle in your community and you still want to join one, just let us know, contact us through the website. We will get you connected. That's the most important thing. Okay. So, all right. So here we go. Can you tell I'm procrastinating talking about paying for your parents' care? Whose idea was it to do this as a podcast or as a webinar? So let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to dive right in here. I wanted to just, before we get started and have the conversation, which is what this is all about, I I just want to level set about what we're even talking about, because and so I'm going to just provide some very basic information, and please feel free to chime in. I want to invite Larisa and Kim to add anything they want. So when you're caring for an older adult, they need lots of different types of care. So they need health care, they need long-term care, they need like social services, and there are different types of programs and resources that pay for these things. So I want to just clarify what we're going to be talking about today and what we're not going to be talking about. So, I just want to say for when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to medical care coverage, the program that pays for that for older adults is called Medicare. So most of you are listening live to this, I'm sure, are very familiar with this, but if you're tuning in later, Medicare is the health insurance program that covers older adults in this country. There are lots of gaps in that program. If you're just signing up for traditional Medicare, there's cost sharing, deductibles, there are things that are not covered that you would think would be covered. And so you have a lot of different options for how you fill those gaps in terms of buying secondary insurance or signing up for private insurance through Medicare Advantage. That's a big topic. We are not going to be talking about that today. We will talk about that later on another in another conversation. What we're really talking about today is how you pay for that day-to-day care. The assistance that your family member needs, bathing, eating, dressing, maybe getting their meals made, getting back and forth from one place to another place, their environment that they live in, the safety of that environment. So these are things like private pay. When you pay for this, so first of all, family caregivers do a lot of that, right? We do that work, but also you can pay other people or other institutions to do that work. And those are things like private pay home care aides, Medicaid covered home care aides, nursing homes, assisted living, and this is why I alluded to the fact that this is such a tough conversation. We don't have great options for this in this country. Medicare does not pay for that stuff, which I think comes as a big surprise to everybody when they hit this stage. Like, what? So many times, most Americans end up either providing the care themselves, the family members, or paying for it out of pocket, relying on savings. There's and Kim is going to tell us that we have other options. There's creative things that we can do to try to find that money in our own lives and programs that are available to us. There is another really big program that does pay for this care, but it has lots and lots of rules around it, and that's called Medicaid. So not to be confused with Medicare. And Medicaid has a lot of rules. We're going to be talking about Medicaid a lot today. But I just wanted to kind of lay out that landscape before we get going. And so let me just ask Larisa and Kim, jump in here. Anything that feel free to correct me if I said something wrong, or add anything in here that you think is important in terms of the basics.
I think you covered it very, very well. And the reason why this is so complicated is because you have two extremes and everyone lives in the in-between. So right. We're all sitting in the middle part where we don't have the really clear answers. And when we're talking about long-term care, it's called long-term because it happens for a very long time. And right. So how it starts is not how it's going to end. Like people are going to change and their care needs are going to change. And so that's why we say like your loved one's on that continuum. And then you're looking at different options all the time along the way because it's not stable. It is dynamic. And so that's also a complicating factor, right?
Oh my gosh. That's such an important point. Thank you for saying that. Larisa, if you want to add anything.
No, I mean, I think she's spot on, and it's a huge problem. They're, sort of on the continuum. They're stage at the beginning where there's the writing on the wall. You don't need a whole lot of care, and you've got plenty of time to plan. And then you've got sort of the crisis where someone needs to enter skilled nursing, and that's relatively easy too. But most people are in that middle gap where they need more levels of care than is safe for them to stay at home. unassisted, but they don't need skilled nursing. And I imagine that's where most of our viewers' concerns lie right now.
Yeah. And I love this concept of the middle, because it's also a question of being in the middle from an income and asset perspective, right? Because
That's true.
There are lots of people, lots, but there certainly are people for whom, no matter how expensive the care gets, they have plenty of resources, very wealthy people kind of pay for this as it goes. And then there are people who qualify for Medicaid very easily because they've been, throughout their lifetimes, living in relatively low income levels and asset levels. But then there's sort of the rest of us, the middle class, where we, an Alzheimer's diagnosis, where you're looking at, just like what Kim said, now we're looking at, particularly like early onset Alzheimer's, where you're looking at 10, 15 years of very expensive care ahead of you. Most of us are going to be impoverished by that. So, but we don't qualify for Medicaid, off the bat. So it's not like we can just, easily shift everything over onto Medicaid. It's not set up to be a middle class program. So it's got a lot of rules around it. So it's tough. Well, I want to talk about Medicaid for just a sec, and Robert, you can leave this slide up while we do this. Just again, to kind of give some basics. So Medicaid and Larisa, I want you to just sort of correct the way I say this, but I think of it as, in fact, you said this to me, so I used your language, is a program for people who have demonstrated levels of need. So the state.
That's right.
And it's run by the states, right?
It is. So it's a federal program where they've shifted responsibility for managing it and operating it to the states.
Got it.
And the important thing to remember about that is, because it's run that way, the rules vary from state to state. So what you do to pay for care when you're in the middle period, you don't need skilled nursing, and you're trying to figure out how to fund care, that always has to be done with an eye toward the fact that you might eventually need skilled nursing. And so you don't want to do anything in that middle period that might run afoul of your particular state's rules.
Right. So it's like completely, and it's funny you should say that, because at Daughterhood, we get a lot of kind of questions, random questions that come in through our inbox. And some of the most heartbreaking ones are the ones where, it's like, you have a daughter living in New York or Virginia, and her mother lives in New York, her mother lives in Virginia, her mother can't live alone. And she's not only trying to figure out what to do with her mom, but trying to figure out which state is going to be the best state for her mother to get, the kinds of support that she needs. And like the programs vary, some states, like if you live in Oregon, there's wonderful the state's very generous, and it's in sort of the types of services that are available, like assisted living and home care, and Medicaid program pays for a lot of things that are not skilled nursing that are really beneficial. Whereas, other states, and I don't want to pick on any, but I'll just pick on Mississippi since that's where I was born, where it's really just kind of like a nursing home or nothing. And so that's an example of the variability.
And there is some hope that, eventually the program will be expanded to include some home and community-based services. Kentucky, for example, is doing that now. But those are only for a limited subset of folks, right? If you've got somebody who needs 24-hour skilled nursing level of care, not all families can fill in the gaps for what the home and community-based services don't provide.
Right.
So it requires some care, and that's why I started practicing elder law, because I've been living with elder care for 18 years. First my in-laws, and then my parents, and you need help. It's a complex set of rules and regulations, and unlike other forms of the law, you don't want somebody to just hand you a set of legal documents like real estate deeds or something like that. You want somebody to hold your hand, and somebody who understands that, the adult children are often hanging on by their fingernails, and the parents needing care or worried about being a burden. And then there's a lot of misconceptions out there too about Medicaid just being for poor people. Well, poor is kind of a term that means one thing to one person and another to another. You can have demonstrated financial need and not consider yourself poor. So it requires some finesse and some emotional support in addition to just the legal support.
I'm so glad you said that, because you're right. There is a stigma around Medicaid that I think for this issue in particular, for long-term care, we need to just educate our family members that, like you said, hold their hands and provide them with some support, because it's, what is considered like demonstrated financial need also has to go hand in hand with demonstrated what we call functional need, which just means that the state needs to see that, in fact, this is a person who, really does need help with, a pretty high level of what we call high level of care need. And so you have these functional needs, and you have the demonstrated financial need according to the state rules. And the rules matter a lot. There's an opportunity for you potentially to get services paid for by Medicaid.
Right. And you need to, and as you pointed out earlier, it's really, when you've got families that live in different states, it raises a whole host of issues. So for Medicaid, you have to have certain asset levels. You have to be below them. But what's considered a countable asset varies from state to state. So just by way of example, for Kentucky, which is surrounded by 7 states, in Kentucky, your IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, things of that nature are not considered available assets or countable assets for Medicaid purposes. So as long as you're taking out the required minimum distributions, the corpus of that retirement account, that's not considered as part of the Medicaid calculation. But if you go right across the river from Louisville to Indiana, the applicant's 401k or IRA might be considered an available asset, but if they're married, their spouses wouldn't. Same for another border state, West Virginia. But then the rest of our border states, Ohio, Missouri, Tennessee, Virginia, and Illinois, those are all considered countable assets for meeting, the Medicaid asset threshold. And then things like when you give money away, and that happens in a lot of circumstances that people don't think about. We hear a lot around here, well, Medicaid just means you spend all your money and then they take your house. So a lot of folks try to transfer their homes to their children, thinking that's savvy Medicaid planning. But if they do that within the 5-year period before they need skilled nursing care, chances are that's treated as a gift. And when you give away money within the 5-year look back period for Medicaid, there's a penalty imposed. Well, the penalty amounts and how it's calculated vary by state as well. So in Kentucky, it's roughly $200 a day penalty. So for every $200 you give away, that's 1 day of paid coverage you don't get. But in California, it's calculated monthly and it's rolling. So with each month, the roughly $10,000 penalty just sort of falls off. In Kentucky, it's, a clear line, 5 years, and you go forward from there.
This is crazy. People, it's really, when people come to me and say well, ask like a basic question about a particular state's rules, I'm always like, I have no idea. Because I don't track this stuff, which kind of just raises the whole issue of why getting help is important and getting educated is important and thinking about is important. Kimberly, I feel like that's sort of, or Kim, I don't know why I feel like that's like your whole kind of your mission. I mean, that's why you started Elder Care Solutions.
I think just from what we've talked about so far, hopefully it's very evident to everyone who's watching or will watch that most people know just enough to have all the wrong information and to think that they know things that they actually don't know, and so just get some help, like know that don't go through this alone because it is that complicated. And I mean, we often see families that you start off having a lot of confidence, like, oh, mom has like 150 grand put away, we're fine. And then they realize like, that might not last me a year. Like how quickly that can go away. And then they're looking at, well, what else do I do? And then if we're going down the Medicaid path, what does that mean for your family? And how do we protect the things that you want to keep for your family? Or if we're going to spend down, do that in a very, very smart way. No one can know all that stuff. Yeah. So we are absolutely on a mission to be there to do like Larisa does, hold their hand and support them and to like give them someone to walk down the path with so that they're making informed and empowered decisions and not fearful decisions out of, just not knowing what's going on. Right.
Yeah. And it can be a really expensive you can make I mean, I think people, and I understand this, like I think there is this just generally, I've noticed, and even in my own family, this sort of reluctance to pay for professional services, whether it's legal services or care management services or advisory services around this issue, because I think there's this stigma that like we should be able to figure this out, right? This is my mom or my dad. I should be able to figure this out. And the thing is that what we see happening is that really, this is just a little bit my soapbox, but like it's like we're having to take care of this incredibly rapidly growing population of very frail older adults with a shrinking number of people available to take care of them and pay for it. And we, as a country, we haven't sort of wrapped our brains around yet from a public policy perspective that we need to put an infrastructure in place for this. And we need to put financing in place. So it's almost like we're all like, it's like we have an educational, it's like as if this was an educational system, we'd all be homeschooling. Like it's like that. We're setting, every family is kind of setting up on their own an entire system inside their own home, like we're paying for. So I think if you can afford it even a little bit, just getting some help with navigating all of this can be more than worth it. And I want to talk a little bit about like, well, first of all, long-term care is really expensive. So that's a big part of the reason why we're talking about this. I mean, a nursing home can, like, just to your point, Kim, like a nursing home could be $100,000 a year. Assisted living, 50,000. Home health aides are 20. I mean, home health aides don't make nearly as much money as they need to, but it still feels really expensive to us. So, $25 to $30 an hour is what, at a minimum is what they should be getting paid. I mean, they should be making, or we should be paying. And so this is a huge challenge. So I want to talk a little bit about like sort of what to do in a crisis. And then maybe come back to kind of like what to think about in terms of planning, because so much of the time the people who come to us are really dealing with this issue for the first time when they're already in the situation. And so Kim, I'm just interested, like when people get in touch with you, when you hear from families and they've already got somebody who's in the situation, where do you start?
Yeah. So crisis mode is the absolute norm. I mean, I think rare is it for someone to say, I think I might be taking care of my parents in the future. So let's start considering what that might look like. Nobody does that yet. And I think, your soapbox inspires my own, which is, I just think maybe volume wise, we hadn't had enough people to deal with this. Where now, as we're aging and we're aging so quickly as a population, I think we'll start to see that narrative change, I think. And we are starting to see more people pop up that are in this support area of helping families deal with this, because now we have people that are living so much longer and their care needs start so much earlier, because it starts off very simple and then it grows and grows and grows, just because we're living for a very long time, which is amazing. But it does bring up this long-term care need, and we have not really addressed that before. So yes, we get clients in crisis mode nearly 100% of the time. So the first thing we do is we say, let's calm down and get quiet. And let's think first about the family's priority. Our biggest philosophy is empowering the family. So take them out of a state of just feeling like they're at a loss and they don't know which direction to turn, and repositioning them into, let's look at your options and empower you with knowledge. So now you can make the decisions going forward, make the decisions that fit you as a family, right? And so once we kind of quiet down a little bit, we can hone in on what's really important, and we can start offering the advice, And to your point with in Larisa's example, a family could easily lose out on $10,000 if they hadn't have sought help. And was that worth spending $1,000 or more? Yes, absolutely. So finding the help is definitely worth it. And I think we had talked before about we don't have that strong connection yet, right? We know if I don't feel so good, I'm going to call my doctor, or my tooth hurts, I go to the dentist, and my car broke down, so I need to call the mechanic. Oh my gosh, mom and dad's care has changed, and that's going to cost a lot of money. And there's nothing that comes to mind about where you go. And it's a lot of times that's let's huddle together as a family, put our heads together and figure this out. And what we need to be figuring out is, who do we go to for help? So, yeah.
No, I mean, that's hugely important. And so a lot of the folks that need the help are the ones that traditionally don't have trusted advisors, right? If you've got loads of money and you can likely self-fund any care that you need, you've got trusted financial advisors, and you're probably already familiar with hiring attorneys. But for everybody else, it's not common that they have a relationship with a lawyer, or they have a relationship with a financial advisor that's going to say, you need to consider doing some planning for when you might eventually need care. And the other thing I like to point out to people is there's a misconception that we hear a lot about how the services are billed. So most elder law attorneys do not bill hourly. It's not litigation. We're helping. And the whole process is fraught with peril if you make a wrong move. So we charge flat fees because we want you to call. We want you to ask questions. I mean, it can be as simple as, the huge need to pick up the phone and call us when you're getting ready to get somebody on Medicaid. You want to make sure that you write checks in the right way. Or if you've given money away and now you return it, you want to make sure that you return it in the right way. So we don't want people to feel like every time they call the office, they're going to get a bill from us. The bill's on the front end, and it's usually a very minor amount in comparison to what they're saving. So locally in Kentucky, just to give you an example, even if we're doing full Medicaid crisis planning where, it's all hands on deck, the person needs to be in a skilled nursing bed yesterday, the cost for all of our services is still less than, a month to month and a half of care that you'd otherwise have to pay for out of pocket.
Right. Exactly. Right. So hopefully everybody has now just been impressed with the complexity of all of this. And this is something that we don't have a way to cover in our country. And they're just really complicated Medicaid eligibility rules. I want to just address one thing that's coming over the chat, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, which is just sort of what kind of care do you get with Medicaid? And I think what I see a really wide variety of responses to this crisis among families. So everything from sort of in a state where, so let's just say like nursing homes get paid by the state Medicaid program, which means the state Medicaid program sets rates to pay the nursing home. If your state is cheap in what they pay nursing homes, it can be harder, especially in rural areas, to find a nursing home or a good nursing home that will take the, yeah. I mean, I don't know if that's been your, but it's, I think sometimes what I see is that family caregivers say, you know what, I'm going to just take care of mom and dad myself.
Right.
Because I don't want them in that environment, or because they want to, they're not in a situation, they're inside that 5-year window. They can't figure out a way to, the only way they're going to keep their, what small amount of money their parents were going to pass on to them is if they take care of their parent themselves. Otherwise, Medicaid's going to take it.
And that's a misconception. And that's a very popular misconception. So even in Kentucky, even if you're in crisis and you need to be on Medicaid tomorrow and you're over the asset limit, we still have strategies where we can help save 40 to 50% of your parents' assets, and perfectly lawful, perfectly ethical ways to do that. Because, Medicaid doesn't pay for everything, right? So you want to set aside some money that can help out around the edges. There's a personal needs allowance that's a common concept across all the states, but how much of your income you get to keep for personal needs, that too varies by state, right? So in some states, you only get to keep $30 a month. In Kentucky, you get to keep $40 a month.
In other places, in the nursing home.
Right. So then, one state, at least, you get to keep as much as $200 a month, but that's rare. It's usually somewhere between 30 to 50. Some states have income caps and you need help getting around those because you could have very limited amounts of money in the bank. But if you've got a good teacher retirement where you're getting over $3,000 a month for that, well, Kentucky's an income cap state. You've got too much income, even though you don't have any money to pay for nursing care. So you need a lawyer or a trusted advisor to help you get around that with what's called a qualified income trust that diverts your excess income. And in other states, how much equity you have in your home is a big issue. And that can range from roughly $600,000 to $900,000. Well, in Kentucky, that's not a huge problem, but someplace like Northern Virginia or Florida or San Francisco, where home values are higher and people have got higher salaries and are paying them down, that's an issue too. But I do want to correct one misperception that a lot of people have, and it's about the quality of care in rural communities. So rural communities, you can actually find better quality of care. And it's for a reason that a lot of folks don't think about. If you're in a county out in the state that's got one nursing home and not a whole lot of other employers, the people that are working in that nursing home know you.
That's right.
They went, they either went to school with your kids or your grandkids, and that personal connection elevates the level of care. They may not be fancy. They may not be what I call, the Hilton or Marriott nursing homes, but the quality of care is often better because they've got to go home to their own families and answer to them about why so-and-so's great aunt,
when they see you at church on Sunday.
Yes.
You're going to have some questions.
But then again, that varies from state to state too. So in Kentucky, you have to be in a designated Medicaid bed, and not all states are that way. So it can be difficult in rural areas if there's an aging population with a lot of need to find a facility that has a designated Medicaid bed. So that's where the difficulty tends to come in rural areas.
Yeah, I think what you're highlighting here is just when you're dealing with like, and because some of the questions are like, is the quality going to be as good in a Medicaid bed? Will we be able to find a facility that'll take Medicaid? And I think
Right.
a lot of this is just, it's a very tough question to answer in the abstract, because it really will depend on, I know operators of buildings that have almost exclusively Medicaid, and they do a phenomenal job.
Right.
I know some that are, private pay, and they don't, but also
Right.
the opposite is true. And so, I think doing your research, but, the thing to remember here is, since we're talking about paying for care, is that, Medicaid, the federal rules say that the only thing the states absolutely have to pay for if you qualify for Medicaid is a nursing home bed. So there's no, what we call an entitlement to the pay for services that like home care or assisted living or adult daycare. Now, lots and lots of states do, lots of them do pay for those things, but sort of getting access to them, again, depending on the state and depending on where you live, can really vary. And so, just as a quick side note, President Biden proposed a ton of new federal funding to go to states to help increase the amount of these kinds of home and community-based services that are available through Medicaid for the type of for our parents for this population. And we've got a long way to go between now and when that money would actually hit the state's bank accounts. But it's signaling, I think, a direction to start to think about how we can pay for things a little bit differently. So I just wanted to kind of flag that.
That's a good point, because there's some, one of the things that people fail to take into account is, you start off, it's usually your kids or nieces or friends that are helping out around the edges. And they're going to do that anyhow. If the writing's on the wall and you can see that within the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to need an elevated level of care, then why not formalize the arrangement? You can enter into caregiver agreements where you pay folks to do what they would do anyhow. And folks typically respond in horror, well, I'm not taking money for taking care of my dad. And I'm like, well, that's not the point. If you enter, if he's got limited resources, say $300,000 in the bank, and you don't want to have to go through a lot of that just to get him on Medicaid, you can enter into a caregiver agreement. He can pay you instead of somebody else to help take care of him. And just because he pays you the money doesn't mean you have to spend it on you. You can put it aside in a little bank account so that when he does need elevated levels of care, that money's been accruing, but it's not a gift, right? If he, without a caregiver agreement, if he just slipped you $200 here and $500 there, that's a gift. And Medicaid's got a problem with that. So,
right. Well, this is, I want to ask him to talk about some of the other strategies. So we've been focusing a lot on Medicaid because that's such a big one. And I'll ask him to talk about some other ones in a minute. But just one of the things that all of this assumes is that we can actually have these conversations with our parents.
right.
So like, it's one thing for me to go to my dad and be like, hey, I'm bringing you some groceries. I'm going to make you dinner tonight. Do you need help with your bath or your bedtime or whatever? It's another thing for me to be entering into a formal contract or putting in place a formal contract, because my dad doesn't want to have that conversation. Like,
no.
it's like, sort of like when he and I talk about his advanced directives, and he's like, I'm not dying, it's like, well, you might someday. I don't know.
Yeah. I told you the story about my dad, and before I share it, so there's a site called theconversationproject.org, and they've got some good guides for starting the conversations, but it's still hard. I mean, my father died last year of pulmonary fibrosis, and he was military. We moved all over the place my entire life, and yet he was the one who didn't want to leave the home, and it was a dignity thing. So you have to be very careful when you're starting these conversations to make sure that you're preserving dignity and doing whatever you need to do so that it's their choice.
Yep.
And my dad finally agreed to go look at assisted living facilities for him and my mother. And my sister and I would take him to one and the other, and then we'd ask him what he thought. And after each one, he'd say, "They're lovely. They are. And I know we need to be there. But," and then we'd say, "Well, what's the but?" And his response was, "They're just filled with so many old people." Well, my dad was over 80 at the time. All right. I don't want to say what he actually said. He was a retired naval officer, so he added some choice language in there. But, that's common. Nobody likes to think of themselves as frail or needing assistance.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it makes it complex, makes this whole thing a lot more complex. And so
it does.
Yeah.
It does.
So Kim, I want to just when you called me the first time and you said, and you were telling me about the work you do, and we were getting to know each other, I'll confess that in my brain, I was a little bit like, how can you have a company about this when there's no way to pay for care? I was like, what do you tell people other than Medicaid and savings? Medicaid and savings. And you're like, I've got a lot of strategies. And
Right.
I'd love for you to just talk about that a little bit. So,
Sure.
because I've learned so much from you.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you for that conversation too. That was one of the best getting to know you conversations I've had. I think too, like when we say things like long-term care, I think a lot of us jump to the nursing home, but there is a lot of care that takes place until someone might be ready to go there. And then everyone's goal is to not put a family member there. Like that's really the last resort. It's not where you're wanting to put a family member. And all that care leading up to it is the stuff that has no coverage. And so that's where like most people live. And so, yeah, thankfully, we're just a team of people at Elder Care Solutions that know a lot of things about a lot of things. And that's all. It was just very happenstance and a lot of professional backgrounds that came together in a unique way to say someone would have to go to 5 or 6 professionals to learn all of this. What if we could deliver it all in one place? And so that's what we do. And so like we might look at like a life insurance plan and say, well, how can we leverage that and maybe cash it out or do something with that? Let's look at your health insurance plans. And with both of them, maybe you put them in place when you had certain needs, but now those have changed. And we need to reevaluate them to make sure that they fit your situation now and are set up to be reevaluated as that changes. Because as we say over and over, this is a dynamic process that's going to change over quite a long time. We also want to explore like, how can you enjoy some tax deductions for a lot of the things that you're going through? And that's a great revenue source,
I'm so glad you said that, because that is, I think there are probably, and I think even since, I'm not even up to speed on sort of like tax credit that are available now, things that have been proposed, but like every time I feel like I'm turning around some presidential candidate or somebody's proposing a tax credit for caregivers, and we're going to see more of that, I think, because there's a real interest in helping. So being aware of that is so important, and I always forget it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And VA too. That can provide a lot for veterans and their surviving spouses, if they qualify, that can provide some assistance pre-skilled nursing. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a big resource we'll look into. It's one of the first questions we'll ask. Are you a veteran? Are you a surviving spouse of a veteran? If so, we need to explore those pension benefits and a lot of other benefits outside of the pension benefit, because there's a lot of tax-free income that can come from those benefits. We can also enjoy like tax-free income from some of the assets if we look into some strategies for that. Of course, the home is a very smart thing to tap into. So we'll have a lot of families is like, well, I guess we need to sell the home. And it's like, well, before we think about that, let's look at other ways to use it in smarter ways which also sets you up for success. If we are going to go down Medicaid eligibility later, we've done some smart things now, Something we've danced around a little bit is the family caregiver. Let's look at ways to get them paid. And that's growing. Just in 2021, the avenues to get a family caregiver paid for their role in providing care is growing. And I think AARP just recently put out a big initiative where so it's amazing. Also, look at your community resources. Sometimes people live next to a resource that has grant money and they provide grants to families that you can use. So no one can know all these things, so you need to find a place where they have some expertise like this. And of course, we are going to drive people to, let's consider the estate planning process and getting your powers of attorney put in place and having a family caregiver contract. And that contract doesn't have to be like, okay, Dad, what do you want to happen whenever, we need to put you in a nursing home? But what kind of care do you want now? And if something changes, what do you want that to look like? And then what do you want the next step to look like? And let's make a plan so that over the course of many, many years, we're all knowing like every step. And that's really important. And then having that that key person. So especially if you have multiple siblings, who's really the one who's like the decisive factor. We're going to come together as a family, but somebody is that person, and that needs to be decided. And in a family contract is really the safest way to make sure that that's going to go as smooth as possible.
No, she's absolutely right. And that just sort of undercuts, when we were talking about the holistic approach to things, we're dealing with families in need. It's not often that it's just the seniors that come in. And I think earlier in the chat message, somebody posted at my request information about the Life Care Planning Law Firms Association. Oh, yeah. And they're sort of the gold standard for holistic care. And there's a link to a video that explains it. But when you come in, you're wanting somebody to help you navigate all of this stuff. So for the Life Care Planning Law Firms Association, a key employee is an elder care coordinator, which can be a nurse or a social worker. And they provide, as part of the flat fee services, care like sitting in on care management meetings, going out to the home and taking a look at it and saying, you just came out of rehab. If you make these modifications, you can probably stay out of assisted living for a lot longer. They're the ones who help navigate the tricky emotional discussions that you have to have surrounding planning. And they're trained to do it in a way that gets everybody on board and feeling better, because the primary goal is to afford things and to save money in a lawful way.
Yep.
But an equally important goal is allowing folks to age with dignity. Nobody likes to have choice stripped from them. So an elder care coordinator, if you can find a law firm that's part of that and uses that model, Kimberly's service in conjunction with a lawyer that maybe doesn't, they can work hand in hand to provide the coordination services, and then the lawyer can provide the legal services like drafting the contracts and agreements and things of that nature.
Yeah. And say you're not only going to work with Elder Care Solutions. Like our clients come to us and they get the bird's eye view, but we're going to have to talk to other professionals. And that's where connecting with law firms that practice the way that Larisa's does is such a benefit, and why us networking with people like that is so important, because now we know you need an elder law attorney, but let me tell you the ones to look for, the ones that are part of the Life Care Planning Association, because they are the holistic viewpoint on law when it comes to elder law. So somebody who just can give you the most information possible, because I think we're showing over and over again, it's complicated. You can make bad decisions very easily and without knowing it. And there's an order, even, if you don't go in a certain order, you've missed out on some big things. And that's just super complicated. That's why this is so challenging, and why we, put off talking about it for a while.
I do want, so I just want to say, they're for people who really truly cannot afford assistance, professional services, or, there are, now I'm going to blank on the state health insurance, and I don't even know if they do long-term care work, but the state health insurance assistance program, which is for people who really truly, are kind of in a position where they just cannot afford to pay for any services. So I did want to mention that just as and I don't know if either one of you have had any interactions with those folks.
And knowing about those, and then also like local offices of aging or councils on aging, it's good to know that those are there and the different ones that are in different locations, so you can drive people to those services as well, because they can be huge help.
Oh yeah, they can.
Yeah, but the point here is like, talk to somebody. Like, don't try to do this. And I mean, we've seen a few things in the chat about sort of folks who've applied for Medicaid eligibility and have kind of got lost in the vortex of that process, waiting to hear. It just feels like this horrible bureaucracy. It feels almost antagonistic, because it's like they're poking around. It's almost like applying for a loan. They want all your bank statements, and it feels very invasive. And, it's just, it's a yucky process to go through.
It is. And if you do it without assistance, I mean, there are things that they are required to look at and that you need to give them, but folks who do it on their own just tend to dump information, and it may not be what they actually need. And you could give them something that could hurt you and would require, a tremendous amount of explanation. So you really, if you've got no money in the bank and you're only drawing $1,600 in Social Security income every month, and you don't have a spouse and you don't have children, and you're in skilled nursing, the nursing home will help you do that. That's one of the easy situations, right? Then the folks who know that they need to go hire a lawyer to help you strategize in advance and to get the application filed for you in a proper way, that's easy in another way. The complicated situation is somebody who doesn't need skilled nursing, maybe doesn't even need the acute level of care that would qualify for a home and community-based waiver to provide some in-home services, but they need help. They need Meals on Wheels. They need somebody to come out and set up some grab bars for them. And so, they need somebody to sit with them a few hours a day. And if they're a veteran with limited resources, I mean, that's easy too. You can tap into that. But what if you're not a veteran, or your spouse wasn't a veteran? Those are the folks, I think, that are hit hardest by the lack of an adequate safety net.
Totally agree. And this is probably a good moment to start to kind of wrap up. And I will say, we've been having this whole conversation because we don't have a financing system for long-term services and supports in this country. And there's lots and lots of reasons why we don't. It's complicated to set something like that up, especially in this political climate. And, but, as a result, we have Medicaid, and Medicaid has these rules because it's sort of like, it's this thing that's been in place since the 1960s. It's like somebody took this program and they just patched things onto it over time. And so we sit here, it's like we got this one car in the driveway, but it's pretty old. And you have to roll up the windows manually. So that's what that's what Larisa and Kim are sort of expert in, how that car works. So you don't break down on the road, just to continue to use that metaphor. And we've got a couple of blogs on the Daughterhood.org website and on Medicaid, and the National Council on Aging has, some basic resources. And so I would encourage you to keep educating yourself. And I do want to say, I'm going to go ahead and just sort of wrap up and say, because we just have 3 minutes, I want to give a quick plug for our next Daughterhood Conversation, which is going to be So I'm going to ask Robert to bring up that slide. There we go. June 17th. And I'm super excited. We have these two amazing Daughterhood Circle leaders who are, just incredible leaders in their community, Jerry Brown and Regina Smith. And they are going to talk about all of the issues that come up in caregiving around race and the many stereotypes that they have to deal with and how that impacts their experience. And I'm going to mostly just sit back and listen to that one. So please join us for that. And let me just say thank you so much to Larisa and Kim. You guys, that was amazing. I think we could keep talking, and there's lots of questions, and this is complicated. So we're going to keep all your questions from the chat, and we're going to keep having these conversations, and if we need to come back and have another one on this topic, we absolutely will. And so just really thanks to those of you who listened and contributed in the chat. This is very much the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish. So I feel really grateful, and thanks you.
Thanks for Daughterhood.
Thank you.
Thanks for tackling the hard things, Anne.
The hard things. All right, you guys. See you later.